Hi, thank you for joining us. We're going to be starting the webinar in about 1 minute. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. Thanks. Hello, if you're just joining us, we are going to begin the presentation in about 1 minute. We're just giving everyone a chance to log in. All right, hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Miro Consulting webinar on the Cloud Wars. My name is Sean Donahue, and I'm the VP of Marketing and Lead Salesforce Analyst at Miro Consulting. And joining me today is Wayne Federico, our Chief Operating Officer, and Tim Hegedus, our Director of Technical Services and Microsoft Practice Manager, also both of Miro Consulting. Today, we'll be discussing the advantages and disadvantages of running Oracle workloads on various cloud vendor platforms. To real quickly go over the webinar controls, if you have a question during the broadcast, please use the question box in your webinar control panel, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Please note that if you would like to ask a question, we won't say who's asking the question, but we will read the question out to the audience and try to answer it the best we can in the time we have. Next slide, please. And please note that all questions will be kept strictly confidential and are only visible to us, the presenters. So I'd like to just quickly go over who Miro is. Before we begin, Miro Consulting is a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, and Salesforce. We specialize in license management, audit advisory, negotiation tactics, support management, and of course, cloud services. Our mission is to help our clients maximize ROI on their software license and subscription investments, stay in compliance, and negotiate successful contracts and audit settlements. So to begin our presentation, we're going to start talking about running Oracle workloads on various cloud vendors. And I'm going to pass it over to Wayne. So Wayne, can you tell us about how the various vendors stack up against each other?
Thanks, Sean. This is Wayne Federico. And what we're going to go through today is we're going to do a comparison of against cloud vendors. But in order to make this as kind of concise as can be, because this is overall a very large topic, we're going to be focusing on the vendors that between Oracle Cloud as well as Azure, Amazon, because they are also authorized Oracle Cloud vendors, right? Oracle, sees them as supported vendors for their products. We are going to touch on other platforms as we go through, just to kind of, add a little information as we talk about the different features and challenges and so forth. But we're going to be the concept here is that we're focused around an Oracle Cloud database implementation for comparison purpose. So essentially, is if somebody had something on premise and they wanted to move it to a cloud platform, they wanted to identify, okay, well, what's, we got Amazon, we got Azure, we got Oracle. How might we want to look at that? And different features that are pretty key within the topic are to bring your own license, proprietary hosting, bare metal, disaster recovery and migrations, as well as some cost comparison. So that's what we're going to go through. So I'll get started. Okay, the first topic is the bring your own license. Now, for the longest time, Oracle has been very specific in regards to, okay, you can bring your license to different platforms, but for the most part, the only ones that they have a counting methodology for licensing their particular licenses are on Azure and AWS. And you could bring your own licenses for that, which was fine. Now you have to have the right has to be within your contracts, and some contracts, if it's just a perpetual, you're typically not going to have an issue. But if you're kind of part of a ULA right now and those licenses, the language has to be very specific in the contract in regards to how you'd be able to use it with that. In a lot of cases with ULAs, you can use it, deploy licenses to it during the course of the ULA. However, once that ULA is over, they're not going to give you any licenses for it. Again, this heavily depends on what's been put into the actual contract, but that's key. The ULAs you have to know. You have to kind of know ahead of time and build in exactly where you might want to move this, because it has to get negotiated up front. And then once you apply licenses to the cloud, obviously you can't continue to use those licenses on premise, right? It's only one spot. And support rules still apply, period, no matter where it is. Proprietary hosting. This topic is specific to applications that a vendor, a client will create utilizing an Oracle software, typically database, that they are running it from. So typically these are SaaS type applications. Somebody creates a internet-based application, clients can ping it, do work on it, and so forth. That would be, if it's custom, the organization designed it and built it themselves and just happened to use it on an Oracle platform. That's what's going to make it proprietary. The fact that it's for many clients, one to many, and you've got this particular solution. Now, the way Oracle has treated this over the years is that you weren't allowed to host this anyplace. You could only host it on your own on-premise. That evolved several times. When Oracle was pushing their own cloud, then they were allowing it on their platform. Just recently, within the past couple of months, Oracle has now started to allow somebody with proprietary hosting licenses that have been negotiated, that they may have been using on premise, that they can BYOL them onto the platform, the AWS cloud platform. And when they do that, they just have to follow the licensing rules in regards to how you apply those licenses within that environment. But you're able to basically now run your proprietary hosting applications from AWS. They had not allowed that before. They don't indicate the same ability with Azure. So you wouldn't want to do that automatically under an Azure platform, but it's definitely something you could potentially negotiate if you really want to use Azure for that. But they don't actually explicitly indicate that they're allowing that with Azure. Okay. Next topic. What we wanted to do with this is just show the different SLAs available for the different platforms. The reason we want to show this is because we do still run into people who sometimes get confused in regards to, okay, it's a cloud system, so I don't have to worry about disaster recovery because the cloud vendor, they're taking care of that and so forth. And we want to make sure that people understand that there's a bit of a separation when it comes to something like any type of a SaaS tool. And these are essentially SaaS types services of a sort, with infrastructure as a service being the primary. there's always a guaranteed uptime, right? That's their SLA for their contracts. And it varies, as you can see with this slide, on a lot of different things. It varies by the regions, whether or not you've got, duplicate regions and, so forth, and some of the ways it's implemented. But these are typically, they would refer to this as 4 nines, 99.99, or 3 nines, 99.9, that type of stuff. But this is only for the vendor is promising their system will be available. It's not disaster recovery for the end user client. It's that you have to design separately. You can definitely utilize some of the cloud features and benefits that they offer, but they are kind of over and above this SLA aspect, because the SLA is only meant to be, hey, if we go down, we're promising it's only going to be this amount of time. We promise we're going to be up a certain amount of time. If your system goes down or you corrupt your data, that has nothing to do with this. And so you would be still down. So you do want to kind of understand what you want to do with disaster recovery, because it's not just a foregone conclusion when it comes to cloud. Now we go into, now as a part of that, which I wanted to bring up, because it's also another aspect, is a bare metal option, okay? Normally these cloud platforms, AWS and so forth, they are matrix type systems. So they're basically a whole bunch of computers in a farm type scenario that you could be utilizing a processor that is from, let's say you're using 6 processors. That could be on 6 different physical machines in that cloud, right? Just picking one, from each of different physical hardware, because it's built in a matrix type scenario. There's lots of software out there, legacy software by clients that they've built a long time ago, or even software like VMware that cannot run within an environment that is a strictly cloud matrix, because it can't talk to the hardware, right? The only things that work well in those environments are stuff that doesn't need to know that processor is on this particular server versus another server. It doesn't care. It all runs above that. And that's why older legacy kind of solutions don't work as well. So you have to make modifications to be able to handle it. But with bare metal, it's you get access to it. All these vendors offer bare metal. The only one that is technically not really full solution is Microsoft Azure. They offer a VMware solution that will run under bare metal, but it's strictly for VMware. So anything you'd need to run would have to be within VMware. So it's not just pure bare metal if you want to run it that way. Everyone else does offer some type of solutions, and I even marked on here Google and IBM. Google, it's pretty new that they've been offering bare metal. It's only been less than a year, I think. Okay. So with these disaster recoveries, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because these could take a significant amount of discussion, but I want to be able to list out the different types of disaster recovery. These are all, for all vendors, it's extra charges. So everything you're seeing here is always going to be an extra charge. It doesn't come with, your subscription. Okay. So you've got multiple ways, and a lot of this DR is going to vary from your very basic backing up your data to some site versus all the way up to doing full standby, where it's like mission critical type of stuff, right? So and everything in between. And as you'll see from these different listings for between the different vendors, it varies by each vendor exactly the functionality and what platforms it'll support, and so forth. The key thing with the Microsoft, or really any of these, is when you do like the lowest one, it's interesting. It can be very cheap because they offer services where you can back up, and it's either free at the backup or very low cost. But when you actually need to restore, either for testing or whatever, that's where the charges kick in, right? So even though the one portion may be free, the full solution itself is not actually free. So you just need to really understand, what do I need it to do? And then you find specifically, the exact type of feature that'll do what you need it to do. This includes if you're going to want to duplicate your environment in different regions, right? Just in case one region goes down, potentially if like the internet goes down in a certain region, right? It's not Amazon's fault. It's just the East Coast went down for Verizon, and that's how you connect. It's not going to be that's not Amazon's fault. Those SLAs don't kick in. So if you want to duplicate to another region, again, that's more cost, but it gives you more protection. Okay. And then when we move into migrations, essentially the biggest thing is, as I discussed before, the fact that if it's a very old type of application and you're kind of moving want to move to a cloud platform, you need to make sure that that is going to run on that cloud platform. Legacy stuff sometimes has to be recoded to be able to run in a matrix platform. Worst case scenario, if it's it's something legacy that you want to just archive, you don't really want to spend money on it because it's just something for archival purposes, then you could basically take advantage of the bare metal solutions, because then you could pretty much take what you've got and drop it on a bare metal, not Microsoft, because if it's not VMware related, then you can run it there. And then you don't really change it. Essentially, bare metal is essentially running just like they would on premise. So that's the key thing with migrations, is to know what do I got to do to get it from there? Do I have to make any changes to it? All these vendors they want to make it as easy as possible. So they typically have plenty of tools to help get you off of other platforms. That's what they're focused on. Azure, they really want to put you on anything. So they're not even, they're focused on selling Azure. They're not necessarily focused on it being SQL Server. So even if you wanted to run, Oracle on it, no issue. If you want to run DB2, they're trying to make it so that they're just a cloud solution, and they make it so you can run, basically anything. Where when it comes to Oracle will always say it's not products, it's product. So they spend the time to try and really make sure that their applications run the best. They can convert from any other platform onto the Oracle platform. They're all about supporting their environment. They're not really looking to be like Amazon, where it's, you can run anything on it, any vendor, and it's strictly about the infrastructure as a solution service. Oracle looks at it from a standpoint of, no, we're providing this because we want, people using Oracle products to be able to run them in a cloud environment, and be at the best cloud environment for those products. And then, the type that you shift to, there's lots of different services based on the different sizes of the sessions and that you can subscribe to, as well as the services. Exadata, is now available in the cloud. Oracle pushes that gives you really high performance, but that's kind of going beyond really just the cloud perspective, right? They're really trying to push major performance enhancements through using that. In this way, again, you're doing it through the cloud. You don't have to buy an Exadata. You just use it that way. Okay, I'm going to shift this over to Tim now, just to go into the particular of our comparisons.
Thank you very much, Wayne. This is Tim Hegedus. I'm the Director of Technical Services and also the Microsoft Practice Manager for Miro. I wanted to just point out the top line of this particular graphic because it shows the type or the shape, sometimes it's referred to as a shape, of the instance for Amazon, Azure, which is Microsoft, and OCI, which is Oracle. So if I use those terms, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, these particular shapes are not intended to inform your own requirements, but rather they are representative of one another. In other words, there's a common denominator associated with them for this illustration. Now, I want to point out on the very last line, under memory, you can see that the Oracle shape has much more memory as a standard. This is a standard type of shape, and you see that there's 120 gigabyte of memory. And this is key because Oracle databases function better with more memory. Now, we'll use this illustration as we go forward. Could we have the next slide, please? In this slide, we see the unit costs, right? For, again, the same vendors, right? And you'll notice on the top line there that they're very, very common, very, very equal. Some of the other aspects of it, perhaps not so much equal. But it is the combination of these parts of this that are crucial to your information. Again, this is not intended to inform you of your configuration, but it does illustrate the point that we're trying to make, which is the comparison of these particular vendors. I'm going to kind of let that sink in for a moment. Now, the next slide, please. I want to call your attention to the first detail line, core factor, right? You notice that there's an NA between underneath AWS and Azure and a 0.5, right? This is highlighted in yellow. It is the actual crux of the matter. This is because Oracle, in its policy in effect on January 23rd, 2018, states that, and I'm quoting here, when counting the Oracle processor requirements in authorized cloud environments, which is AWS and Azure, the Oracle processor core factor table is not applicable, hence the NA. So, if you were to use brand new licenses to set up these environments, you would see that you would have nearly $15,000 in prices per month in price for both AWS and Azure, while that core factor details about half of that price. Right? If you are using existing licenses and just paying support, right, you can see that the numbers again are fewer or less, right? But they are halved by Oracle, and that is largely due or primarily due to that core factor. Next slide. So this slide now incorporates the monthly cost associated across the vendors for all of their BYOL solutions. It incorporates only the instant cost, right? Again, this is not intended to inform your decisions about what your environment looks like because of your specific requirements, whether that be relative to bandwidth, the storage amount, the storage type, etc. Right? Now, remember that all of these prices, the 14,903 to 14,905, etc., are discounted from an Oracle perspective by about 20 to 25%. Okay. New licenses, right, shown in the very first line there, detail line, are $15,000 per month for both AWS and Azure, right? That's inclusive of that cloud environment, okay? This totals some $180,000 for that first year. It is about half of that for Oracle because of the smaller environment change, fine, but primarily because of the core factor, which again we've decided to add on the bottom of this graphic because it's so important. The center line where it says monthly second year, it really refers to subsequent years or existing licenses. And it involves only support fees, which would be remitted in perpetuity. It's only about $2,500 for both AWS and Azure, but again, about half of that for OCI, right? So it goes from $30,000 per year to about $15,000 per year. So again, these costs are just for comparison purposes, and they're not intended to inform your specific requirement, but it's illustrative of the cost variance between the Oracle OCI solution and those by AWS and Azure. So with that, I'll turn it back to Wayne.
Thanks, Tim. And what I'd like to add is it's because of this scenario is why when you talk to an Oracle rep, they will often bring up the, AWS Azure is twice as expensive. Technically, if you're comparing apples to apples, yes, because of that core factor. But what we want to make sure we always remind people is that most people don't upgrade their environment, their on-premise environment, to the latest and greatest, fanciest, newest equipment, and then decide to move to cloud. It's not typically the way it's done. Usually you've got some aging stuff and you're making the decision to, should I move to cloud or should I buy new for on-premise? And it's in those situations that when you go to move it, well, sure, if it's on older equipment, when you move to an AWS environment that's much more advanced in the cloud, then you may actually need less licenses than you're running on the older on-premise stuff. And it might eliminate that doubling that is kind of built into the way that they've priced it. So it doesn't automatically mean that it has to be twice as expensive. It may not be in your particular situation. So the last thing I wanted to touch on here was just on some of the lesser utilized cloud platforms. Google Cloud has been around for a while. The problem there with Oracle was that since Oracle didn't view them as an authorized cloud environment, there was really no way to run Oracle in Google Cloud because there was no way to license it. You had there was no way that Oracle wouldn't call you on, particularly because of the way that Google Cloud worked. There was a lot of shared stuff going on, which we know Oracle doesn't like. So that's one of the main drivers that came up with the bare metal service, which is actually completely separate from their Google Cloud infrastructure. It's in a completely different environment altogether. And then this way you can run it, and then their licensing is going to essentially be basically the same scenario as it would be on premise, because that's the way it would be calculated. And then with IBM, IBM also has services that are not technically an authorized cloud environment as well. They do have technologies like IBM LPAR and so forth that enables some segmenting of processing power that Oracle does recognize. So there are some aspects, particularly among bare metal uses, that you would be able to do the same type of thing with IBM Cloud. So it's not that we see it often, but those are other options that exist out there. So just in case anyone was curious. And then that's it for questions.
All right, thanks, Wayne. We are at 3:01, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know that a lot of you had questions. I have all your questions written down, recorded here, and we're going to get back to you after the webinar here is over and update you, because a lot of them we have a couple questions we need to ask you on your exact situation before we can give you an answer. So everyone who asked a question, we will follow up with you today and get back to you. But otherwise, thank you for joining us today. If you have further questions that you didn't ask already, or would like a one-on-one session to discuss these topics or anything else we can help you with, please email us at sales@miroconsulting.com. Call us at 732-738-8511, extension 1208, or just visit us on the web at miroconsulting.com. That concludes the webinar for today. Thank you very much, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.